All right. Good morning. Buenos dias. It's Reverend Charles Hall. Good morning. Center for Spiritual Living, Palm Desert. Good morning, friends and family all over the world. Good morning. My brother Jeffon Seeley is in the house.
Good morning. Good morning.
In his house, as I'm in my house.
Yes.
We're both in the house, aren't we?
That we are.
Happy Tuesday, my brother. How are you today?
Doing good. Happy Tuesday to you. Time's continuing forward. Another really great chapter in the book.
Yep.
One that really caused me to pause and think a little bit more about some of the concepts that are discussed that we'll get into. But
yeah,
all in all, things are good. How are you?
I'm good. What do I have to report? I don't think things are rocking and rolling. I draw a blank. No story to tell that comes to mind at this moment.
Well, I must say that I enjoyed the Friday's video. Where in the world is Dr. Joe?
Wasn't that fun?
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. We meant to have fun with that. That was cool that he's having so much fun too, and really unplugging and just he and Trey. That was cool. Yeah, have some of the crew there as well, and just bring everybody up to speed. So yeah, he'll be back in a couple of weeks, and we'll take it all from there.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
So let's see. For those of you that might not have turned in before, tuned in, turned on. We are on chapter 12 of, I think it's 19. Is it, Jeffon? 19 chapters?
Yeah. This is a 19.
Chapter.
Yeah, it's a good.
Week 12. Well, 18, it looks like.
18, okay.
Yeah. Week 12 of how to be an anti-racist.
Overall thoughts about this chapter?
Well, I actually really got turned on in the second half of the chapter. It started to make a lot of more sense, I guess. Can I just jump into something, or do you want to go with the slides?
No. Go ahead, jump in.
It actually made me think on page 162 at the very top, he talked about, this is one of the things that that got me. He said, talking about capitalism, and he was talking about what Senator Elizabeth Warren had to say about it. And she said, I love the competition that comes with a market that has decent rules. The problem is when the rules are not enforced, when the markets are not level playing fields, all the wealth is scraped in one direction. Theft is not capitalism. And then she went in and talked about a series of, policies and things like that. But it made me think about organized sports. Sports are only fair, and competition's only fair when the rules are enforced equally to everyone.
Right.
Soccer, football, basketball. And I get as much in arms with the referees when I think a call is unjust. I mean, that's one of the things that drives me crazy. When my Seahawks are playing on a Sunday and they call pass interference and it wasn't pass interference, or but the design, and then there's all sorts of conspiracy theories that come along with that. But when I was able to kind of wrap myself around it in that way, because I am a sports fanatic, that when we talk about class and racism and classism and racism, that's how it started making, and obviously what we're, I think, called to do is look at things through our own filters so that they can make sense for us, but also consider another filter so that we can expand our thinking about something. But when I was able to put into context the discussion that he has around this whole chapter about class and race, capitalism, and I mean, he even gets into socialism and Marxism and all this kind of stuff, which I know we'll get into. Mm-hmm. Because I have been so influenced by organized sports throughout my life, there's an inherent trust. There's a trust that comes along with knowing that the rules are applied equally to every participant and to both teams, to each participant or both teams. And it occurs to me that that's what I extrapolated from this, that's a direction we can look to go in. And obviously there's a lot of unearthing and educating and policy shifting and things like that need to happen. But to me, that was kind of a purity of it. Follow that?
Yeah, I do. I that was the one thing that really, and we'll get into it, but the whole conversation around capitalism, particularly in this time, and the way that they're, as he says, conjoined twins, racism and capitalism, and the way that they fed off of each other throughout history, that has disproportionately pushed wealth and resources and capital towards a selected group of individuals. And he takes it a little bit further as we will move into it, and talks about class racism is not just focused on people of color, but also poor white people, poor Black people, poor Latinx people, poor Asians, and the way in which the disparities and inequalities or inequities are apparent. So it was a good conversation, really good chapter.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to how we unpack this. One other thing that kind of really summarized it to me, again, it's on toward the end of the chapter. On page 163, Jeffon, he said, racial capitalism makes countries like the Democratic Republic of the Congo one of the richest countries in the world below ground and one of the poorest countries in the world above ground.
Yes.
That was a powerful sentence.
That really was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you underline that one?
Yeah, I did. And I actually have it in the slide. So
cool. All right.
No, but that's something we'll touch upon, because it's disproportionately shown that the countries that seem to be the poorest in the world are those that have maybe been a little bit more of the victims of capitalism and racism throughout at least modern history.
And exploitation.
Exploitation. Yes. So with that said, may I jump into the slide?
You're the man.
All right. So as always, we have some slides that we'll walk through. And if you have questions, if you have thoughts or suggestions, please feel free to share that. And I do want to say, before I open up the slide, we did receive an email from, I believe it was Kristen, who shared something that was in total alignment with this chapter. And when I get to that portion, I just want to kind of shout her out for sharing something that she found.
I'm glad you'll unpack that. Cool. That's excellent. That's an article. What was that? The New York Times? Where was that from?
Yeah, I believe it was the New York Times. I don't have it pulled up here, but it was about the wealth gap that exists. From white and Black Americans.
Kristen, if you're here, let us know.
Yes, and thank you for sharing that. So as always, he begins with some definitions, which I enjoy, because then I can at least experience the definition as I'm going through the chapter. So class racist, what is that? One who is racializing the classes, supporting policies of racial capitalism against those race classes and justifying them by racist ideas about those race classes. You could just meditate on that and kind of unpack that. And then anti-racist.
That's a lot in there, isn't it?
It is. When I first read it, I was like, all right, I think I understand it, but let me just read through this chapter and see if I can grasp it.
Yeah.
And then the concept that Rev Charles was just kind of describing, anti-racist, anti-capitalist, one who is opposing racial capitalism. Notice that it does not say being completely against any type of capitalism. It's simply saying opposing racial capitalism. An important point, and I don't want people to tune off because they hear somebody say capitalism is bad. We're trying to dive into the history of capitalism and recognize the role in which it's played in perpetuating racial inequities that exist.
And I think that's a great point, Jeffon. And even you and I think we're in a beautiful way, kind of stepping out on a limb here as well, to explore these things.
Yeah.
And I'm not a historian. I wouldn't call myself a historian or an economist or anything like that. You know, I'm a minister, and I got into this game to be with people's hearts and hopefully inspire them. And we're diving into some things that for me are even uncharted to, you know, like, just because we're leading this dialogue doesn't mean we're experts in it necessarily. Not as a disclaimer, but I think it's important to understand that we're all working on growing. That's my point. Yeah.
I was going to say that exact thing. Exactly. Yeah. This is a process that we're going through together. And we're not here to declare that we are the end all be all and know all of this. We are learning and exploring, as hopefully everybody is as we go through this conversation. So there is a portion here on page 152, this concept of white flight, and then another concept that I haven't really thought about, which is black abandonment. And this was about people fleeing from the urban centers where they would ultimately say what people would call the so-called ghettos, which began to create this place that is overcrowded and designed to extract wealth from the residents. I thought about this and his particular story of living in Philadelphia. And the first thing that popped into my mind was when in Atlanta, when I lived there, I was doing real estate investing, and I ended up being able to get this property that was in Decatur, which is it's many different pockets of Decatur. And I remember when I would tell people, and the first thing they would say is, "Oh, are you past this street?" Because past that street was the idea that that is a dangerous neighborhood. And I was in that area. It wasn't anything that I felt as if it was dangerous at all. But it was just so fascinating how these particular little streets or ways that cities are designed creates these pockets of what people would call the ghetto. And I know in Seattle, when I lived there, it's the same thing. Oh, you're going down to White Center, or you're going down through Federal Way or little pockets of Kent, or even the Central District. You need to be aware. And it's so. Anyways.
Well, and I remember when I went to for a hot second coming out of high school, I looked at Iona College in New Rochelle, New York. Mm-hmm. And my buddy and I went out there and we took the train from the city up north to the campus. And there are, in a lot of cities, there are clear lines of demarcation.
Yeah.
You go from one neighborhood to the next, and it is, I don't know what I'd call them, tenements, but tenements to, and if someone from New York knows this better than I do, I just have kind of a vague memory of it, to, and these kind of low income apartment homes to massive mansions the further north you get.
Yeah.
So, but in Seattle too, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And in that first page or two, a gentleman who's an anthropologist, I believe it's Oscar Wilson, I believe is his. Oh, Kenneth Clark, excuse me, said the dark ghetto is an institutionalized pathology. And there's a quote that kind of goes into that, which I'm not going to unpack here, but ultimately what it's getting into is he's trying to help us recognize that poor people are a class. And when I say he, the author, Dr. Kendi, Black people are a race, and Black poor people are a race class. So when we say poor people are lazy, we're expressing an elitist idea. And when we say Black people are lazy, we're expressing a racist idea. And when we have this intersection of elitist and racist ideas, that then forms class racism.
Yeah.
Which I thought that was such a powerful point to bring up, in the way in which at times subconsciously or even unconsciously, we allow this intersection of elitist ideas, I'm speaking for myself, and racist ideas exist within my mind, and I can put people into little pockets that I say that they're designed to, based upon the way that I perceive them as how they are appearing in this moment.
Yep. And I like the idea of the whole idea of pathology as abnormal. He talks about it being abnormal. And then at the end of that paragraph, abnormal from whom? What group is the norm? White elites, Black elites, poor white, who's the norm?
Exactly.
But then generally, as we've discussed many times throughout this book, the people that are in power or have the most influence define the norm, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's always a interesting point that we can bring ourselves back to. When we talk about bringing ourselves back to principle, when these ideas that we find, festering within our minds are directing us to a place of separation or disconnecting from the oneness that we share, begin to ask ourselves, from whose standpoint am I choosing to see this or say this or express this from? Who am I comparing normal and not normal to? Where did those ideas even come into my mind?
Right.
And
the mind of within what Ernest Holmes says, race consciousness, talking about, or collective consciousness. Yeah. How was it birthed there as well? Whatever the it is in the collective consciousness. Right. And he gets into a little bit of that too, a little bit further down. I'm sure you're going to point on this when we get into the history of capitalism and racism and how the conjoined twins grew and developed. Yeah.
Right. That's a great image, conjoined twins, right? So when I
guess, what would that be? Siamese twins? Is that something we say? I don't know.
Yeah, it's just, and Martin Luther King has a incredible quote around that. The three, I think he calls it the three heads of evil, which I have in one of the slides. So when we racialize classes, support racist policies against those race classes and justify them by racist ideas, we are engaging in class racism. To be anti-racist is to equalize the race classes. And he's talking about ways in which we do this to a variety of race classes. I'm sure people have heard the term white trash. I'm sure people have heard the term ghetto black people. I'm sure that we've heard the terms of those things reflecting upon a variety of all racial groups, and the ways in which that does not bring equality or equity, but instead creates this hierarchy. As Rev Charles said, whoever creates the norm ultimately creates the hierarchy, which is on the kind of the bottom part of page 153. If the elite race classes are judging the poor race classes by their own cultural and behavioral norms, then the poor race classes appear inferior. And that's something that it always comes back to. It seems it's like the role that we are playing in this superior inferior dyad and keeping it in play as if we're playing tennis and hitting it back and forth across the net. Sometimes we're superior here, sometimes we're inferior here. Well, they're inferior to me because look how I appear, or I'm inferior to them because look at the car that they're driving or the neighborhood they live in. And we're completely missing this inherent worth that is dwelling within all human beings. That's something I've really been working on.
I love that. That'd be an interesting anonymous poll to take. How driving down the street, do you judge someone by the kind of car they drive? I mean, I guess this is probably an anomaly, but my understanding is that Warren Buffett lives in like a 2 or 3 bedroom Rambler somewhere in Oklahoma or something, Nebraska, right? Mm-hmm. So you drive by his house, he's like, he's not one of the top 10 richest people in the world. You have no idea.
Yeah.
It's just the way, you said it perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah. And simultaneously, what are then the thoughts that you have when you see a group of people who are without homes sitting on the sidewalk? I mean, what are the thoughts that you have about that person or group of people in comparison when you're pulling up to a Whole Foods and you see somebody in a $400,000 Maserati or Ferrari? Yeah. And what is the real difference from an inherent human standpoint between any group of people? Is it just simply the thoughts that we're choosing to say are true? Is it only what appears to be in the physical realm? Or is there a spiritual place that we can tap into that allows us to recognize and stand behind many of the great spiritual mystics throughout history that were able to transcend all of that?
Which is where we're attempting to steer to, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Does a Maserati really cost $400,000?
I mean, I'm sure that there are certain Maseratis, but I know every time I'm in Palm Desert and I'm driving down, I don't know what that street is. It's where Whole Foods is. But there's the Bentley
111.
store.
That's the 111. Yep.
There's the Rolls Royce store. There's the Lamborghini store, like it's a Toys R Us or something.
No, you got it. It's a store.
But those I know every time I'm in Palm Desert, I see one of those Maserati SUVs that are a minimum of $250,000. So, anyways.
Yeah, right on.
So. As this chapter goes along, and please, Rev Charles, feel free to pause me at any time. But on page 154, he's talking about, 153, 154, this difference of a culture of poverty and a cycle of poverty. And this is something that I really paused on and kind of reflected a little bit more. This cycle of poverty is the predatory exploitation moving in lockstep with meager income and opportunities, which kept even the hardest working people in poverty and made poverty expensive. That is something that I've seen in my family. People who tend to or seem to work the hardest, it's like as if they can't catch a break, and they're in an environment. Again, I'm thinking of, we went golfing with my uncles just I think I mentioned this last week, but my aunt lives in this pocket of San Bernardino, and I mean, I'm just the environment itself, it seems as if it has this draining effect of, maybe it was just how I was thinking about it, you know. But it did not seem as if it was the same feeling I get when I'm driving by those shops in Palm Desert.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a night and day type experience. And there are people who I know, my aunt, my grandma, who worked so hard, and it seemed as if they were able to open up a little doorway, but not really step towards what many other people who I know or friends of mine were able to experience. And I don't know how to really equate that in my mind. I don't know where I'm going with this. It's just, I'm thinking out loud.
Yeah, I don't know that we definitely necessarily need a destination. He goes on, something was making poor people poor, according to this idea. And I don't know either, Jeffon. You know, I know that there are certainly people that work their tails off that can't seem to catch that break. So it'd be interesting to have a conversation with the author about what role consciousness plays in this. And I'm just asking the question. That's all. I'm just asking the question. What role does consciousness play in it? Obviously, we're talking about system and policy. Does consciousness, are we talking about consciousness? Well, we must be, from an individual standpoint and a collective standpoint. So so putting it to the test of if I'm sitting in front of Ernest Holmes, if we're talking about, this is just Adair said, I didn't see the rest of that, but I just said Ernest Holmes, but I'm going to finish my thought and then see what Adair said. But if I'm sitting in front of Ernest Holmes, I'm guessing he'd say it all has to do with consciousness. And it's also the consciousness that we're called to change individually and as a collective which would affect policy and system. And is that actually effective? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? I'm sitting here saying that as a lifelong student of the science of mind. How does consciousness and our ability to think and problem solve and elevate play into the idea that the systems are actually in place to hold folks down?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I want to see what
Adair said Ernest Holmes would want to answer the question. Rev Charles, you might be okay.
Yeah, I just muted accidentally. What's that?
Well, I was gonna say you might be on mute.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna just kind of share a thought, and this may be far-fetched. It may make sense, and it may miss the mark, but it's okay. So, if I remember correct, there was a chapter earlier that was talking about, you know, if people would just be more responsible for doing this or that, to be more responsible for your plot in life, and be willing to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and continue forward. Now, I would dare to say that within all of us, there is a seed of infinite potential that is there. There is something that we can all tap into, regardless of where we're from or what we look like, that we can begin to express the infinite gifts that are dwelling within us. There are certain ways in which we may have been brought up, or certain environments that we may have been exposed to that have capped that. I'm thinking of people who when I say cap that, I mean it put this invisible ceiling that prevents us from being able to recognize that. And I'm thinking of some of my family when we first started going to CSL in Atlanta, um, and the ways in which we had to unpack our pre-programmed thinking, and the ways that we were brought up to think, not even knowing that we were thinking this way, that is continuing to perpetuate or create the reality around us, had to be shifted and transformed in such a way for us to even stand behind or upon the principles that are discussed in Science of Mind and New Thought tradition. And I feel as if I'm thinking of some of my cousins and my wife's family. When I share some of these concepts of divine consciousness and infinite potential and the ability to think differently, it's almost as if sometimes I'm speaking a foreign language because it's something that hasn't even been registered in their radar, though it is something that's within them from a spiritual realm. And perhaps so consciousness, I guess what I'm saying, comes into play, but how can you lead people into consciousness or recognizing the infinite consciousness if that is something that is so far from their reality? But I don't want to say that it's a powerlessness type thing, because the power is in the individual.
Does powerlessness exist when we're ignorant to our infinite, to our potential? You know, is victim consciousness a thing until we realize that we actually, and I'm actually asking these questions as if I think about these things as if I was asking a panel and not being the panel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Me too.
How did the consciousness of the family that was ripped from their home back in the historical, when the slave trade started, how did their consciousness play into that?
Yeah.
These are the types of things I wrestle with. Would it be that I don't even know what the answer is, but these are like the rubber meeting the road questions for me when we get into social activism, quote unquote, making things right, equity, equality. It's actually my work, and probably the work of a number of people right now. And I hope the work of a lot of our spiritual leaders is that we're actually wrestling with these things and don't just pretend we have an answer because we're sitting in the chair.
That is such a powerful point. And I hope that everybody can sense that from the two of us, that we're not here to declare everybody follow this particular direction, but we're working through this. And as we're hoping that we all can have this conversation to continue forward.
Yeah. So I love that I continue wrestling. Did we have a few comments that came in there, Jeffon?
Yeah, there's one here from Andrea, I believe. How does consciousness play into keeping poor? I'm thinking that the same consciousness that creates a hierarchy where the rich or richer are considered better, thus more worthy, the reverse is true. So the mass consciousness keeps the poor from opportunity because the underlying feeling is they are not worthy or better. Therefore, they just can't catch a break. The break isn't offered to them. I actually think that that's a powerful point. When we think of opportunities that are available, and the connection maybe that families have with other families, people in certain positions. Well, CEOs often work together. Oh, we went to that college. We can get you in there. Let me just make a call to the president. Oh, don't worry about it. Yeah, just apply. I mean, we got money to pay for your school. Whereas a lot of other individuals in poor communities, I mean, going to college. So you're telling me that I can't help pay rent, or you're telling me that now I have to buy books or go into debt and continue to borrow money that I've seen my family never being able to escape from this type of predatory lending that exists.
Yep.
Therefore, as Andrea said, it's easy to borrow money if you already have some.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes, Jeffon, what I'm left with is nothing. Sometimes sometimes what I actually experience is being left nowhere. As ministers, we're called to have answers, and as we explore some of these things, sometimes I feel a little embarrassed about it because of the supposed tos. But sometimes I'm just left with nothing, and something at the same time. I feel left with nothing And the something is then that the simplest thing that I can do today is to wake up and help somebody else wake up in a non-hierarchical, just brother to brother, brother to sister. What can we do today to wake up a little bit more so that from a groundswell, from a what's it called? I can't think of it. Just from a few people waking up to something and thinking of a new thought, which is what my sermon's about this week anyway. Let go of your BS and create a new thought. BS being belief system. And the other thing too. So tune in, it'll be interesting. Yeah, I maybe that's it.
Yeah. A simple path.
Simple
And
path.
sometimes just sitting with it and embracing the not knowing, or the inner exploration, as my mentor says, becoming an astronaut of inner space.
Yeah.
And being willing to venture through that seemingly unknown.
Yeah.
There's something that I want to share on the bottom of page 154. And we're only 2 pages in, so we so he let's see, on the bottom 2 paragraphs. I'm going to read just some of this very quickly on bottom of page 154. So first slavery, then segregation, and now poverty and a life in the ghetto made Black people inferior based upon that thesis of a culture of poverty. Therefore, oppression, inferiority thesis, which is not what we're saying. We're saying that there's a cycle of poverty that has existed. And something that was making poor people poor, according to this idea, it was welfare. We often hear people saying, well, if people would just get off of welfare. Welfare transformed the individual from a dignified, industrious, self-reliant spiritual being into a dependent animal creature without knowing it. That was a U.S. Senator, Barry Goldwater. So Goldwater and his ideological descendants said little or nothing about rich white people who depended on welfare of inheritance, tax cuts, government contracts, hookups, and bailouts. They said little to nothing about the white middle class depending on welfare of the New Deal, the GI Bill, subsidized suburbs, and exclusive white networks. Welfare for middle or upper middle income people remained out of the discourse on handouts, as welfare for the Black poor became the true oppressor in the conservative version of the oppression inferiority thesis. And that is something that I think is such an important point for us to recognize, was that the welfare is not just this or that, but we have to encompass the whole idea of ways in which people are given a leg up or a stepping stool to stand upon when other people are not, or we point at a very small step that we're providing to a group of individuals who may be poor in nature or poor in finances, and say that they are draining the system.
Yep. How often have you heard the terms golden parachute or corporate welfare?
Yeah.
It's like the only one I might take exception with out of this is the GI Bill. I mean, folks went and put their lives on the line for the GI Bill. They went and fought, whether you agree with the war or not. My grandpa paid for his school on a GI Bill. Yeah,
I think this is my thought. What he's maybe saying is, because my grandparents, both my grandfathers fought in the war, and the difference between the two were night and day. My grandfather, who was white, was able to get us a loan, build a house in a very nice area of Salt Lake City. My African-American grandfather, I mean, once he got out, it was menial jobs. And while he may have been exposed or had the same opportunities, he wasn't as welcomed into communities as my grandfather, who was white.
I hear that. Yep. Do we have another comment that came in, Jeffon?
Yes. Adair said, people's belief system is most often self-limiting, When we realize we are all expressions of the Most High, we can have a new awareness and a new expectation about what our experience can be.
Amen. I actually this paragraph really, this idea really stood out to me as well, Jeffon. You know, it's like it's okay. Welfare is creating this system of poverty and laziness, whatever it might be. But the whole idea of, I mean, we're just talking about dollar amounts at some point. $10 billion versus $1,000. Whatever it might be. It's
Right.
still some sort of bailout, right?
Right.
It's an interesting point.
It really is. It really is. Okay, I'm gonna kick it into gear.
We're already at 10:35. So
I'm gonna kick it into gear a little bit.
Are you kicking into gear?
So W.E.B. Du Bois, the wage of whiteness and wage of black elitism, which he's often referring to, how W.E.B. Du Bois transformed from particular states of consciousness to embracing one that is more anti-racist. And in this concept of wage of whiteness or wage of black elitism was another way of embracing class racism class racism by way of putting down the people who they seen or saw as inferior.
And that's the points back to last chapter too, when he was the author was in the editor's office, and he referred to them ends.
Yes.
And that's the black elitism, and then there's the white trash, classes.
Yep. And so this was the point that I love this Martin Luther King Jr. quote. Prior to, he said, "It's impossible to know racism without understanding its intersection with capitalism." Martin Luther King Jr. said, "It means ultimately coming to see that the problem is racism, the problem is economic exploitation, and the problem of war are all tied together. These are the triple evils that are interrelated." And this speech that Martin Luther King gave on this particular concept is such a powerful one. I believe it might be his speech, "Why Jesus Called a Man a Fool," which is an incredible sermon. And then the conjoined twins, we've said that a few times. Racism and capitalism, they have ancient siblings, which are sexism, imperialism, ethnocentrism, and homophobia. And we know that all of those things fuel this divide that allow us to forget or kind of completely ignore the oneness that we share with one another. Okay, so this is where Kristen shared some information, and this is an important point that I think that we should park on for a second. We won't do it too long because we only have 20 minutes, and 20 minutes goes like that. So, 21st century, persisting racial inequities in poverty, unemployment, and wealth show the life work of these conjoined twins, racism and capitalism. The Black poverty rate is triple that of the white poverty rate. Black unemployment has been at least twice as high as white unemployment for the last 50 years. The median net worth of white families is about 10 times that of Black families. And we see it also reflected in housing policies, in tax policies, in mass incarceration. And I don't want to just pin it Black versus white, but we also see these disparities with the Asian culture, not quite as much, and also with the Latinx culture, which we see that is also a big disparity that exists. And so this is something, and Kristen shared the wealth gap that went into detail about the median income, and I don't know if I have that here, the median income of houses, and I guess it's right there. The median income of white families is about 10 times that as Black families. So, Rev Charles, I have a question for you. Why has this continued to exist, and what can we do aside from bringing awareness to this issue? I mean, what are some tangible things that we could do?
Well, what I appreciate about this, first and foremost, is bringing data to the table. Because when you bring data, you actually bring real information. It's not just opining or your view of things. It's data. It's based on studies and based on people that have really investigated this. So we have to look at it from the standpoint of, okay, these things are actually happening, so let's actually address them. So what's your question? What can we actually do, and why has it been going on for so long?
Yeah, I mean, what can we do? Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Sometimes, Jeffon, sometimes I'm at a loss.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and one of the simplest things that we can do is wake up. I mean, here's what I have to be willing to do is let go of my BS. That's what I have to be able to do. Actually see a broader perspective. I have to be able to do that. I have to be uncomfortable enough to sit in a room of people or have a conversation like this in which I share an idea and my idea is challenged, and I might be embarrassed because of that. I might be showed a different way, and I might be embarrassed, and I might feel a little bit of shame. But at the same time, I go home and think about it and say, well, you know what? That person was right. And because of that, I need to change. And I think we need to put ourselves in situations where we're having conversations that are going to make us uncomfortable. We have to at least be willing to listen to various points of view, and then be willing to be wrong, be willing to have made a mistake. Again, I go back to sports. Everybody that's great always talks about the failures that they've had.
Yeah.
And that you fail first before you get to greatness. And that's part of the learning curve. We have to get over ourselves, Jeffon, in order to grow. And within that, we understand that I am part of one harmonious one.
Yeah.
And so there's principle that supports my willingness to grow or my capacity to grow. We have to continue we have to be willing to continue to have the difficult conversations and be willing to be changed. And I remember having this conversation with Dr. Will. I said, you know what, some of my friends, there's some people I talk to, they're concerned that, well, if we have policy changes, what if what about all the resources that I have and this and that? And it's like, well, we share them. That's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
We share our resources. So
there's a question here. What economic system is superior to capitalism? And he goes into that in the book.
He does. He actually unpacks it quite eloquently.
Really, really well. Where it's not saying just, well, get rid of capitalism. It's simply saying we cannot mirror racial capitalism, racism and capitalism together. And we have to recognize the history of capitalism, just the way we need to recognize the history of racism in this country, and see that capitalism was built around or upon selling and exploiting bodies and places that led to the extinction, or not extinction, but destruction of cultures.
Mm-hmm. There's a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. I would encourage everybody to read that book. It is a powerful book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And it actually talks about, this guy, I think he worked for the CIA or probably the CIA, something like that, talked about how the United States would deliberately go into another country and make them beholden to us so that we could exploit them, which brings me back to page 163. And I want to be clear, I'm not anti-United States. I love my country.
Yeah, of course.
We're talking about systems, and we're talking about the ways that we do things that exploit others. That's what we're talking about here. And that fundamentally is not in alignment with principle, and it's out of integrity. Think about it. I think one of the most powerful things we can do, Jeffon, is take it from a global perspective to a personal perspective. Would you exploit your friends to get over on them?
Yeah, absolutely not.
Would you do that? Or would you exploit a stranger to get over on them?
Right.
But that's what we're talking about here. And it brings me back to Racial capitalism makes countries like the Democratic Republic of the Congo one of the richest countries in the world below ground, natural resources, and one of the poorest countries of the world above ground.
Yes. And
So-
recognizing the destabilization of that country was done intentionally to be able to exploit the resources below ground at the mercy then of human bodies
That's
above
right.
ground.
That's
And
right.
when we talk about colonialism all throughout Africa, when we talk about colonialism all around the country and the ways in which that shook up the foundation and the bedrock of that culture itself, and then put people in power that would be for the exploitation, give them a little bit of money in return, and you can continue to milk that as long as you want. And when people stand up, you say that it's a rebellion and a coup, and we send people in there to silence them, and it goes on. And that's been done throughout history.
Yep. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. I definitely encourage folks to read that. It'll stir you a little bit. So yeah, I and all of what we're talking about is based on the idea of otherness, not the principle of oneness.
Yeah.
It's the nightmare called otherness. And I think what we can do is heal that within ourselves. I keep coming back to this, but again, to me, at this point, there's no such thing as world peace. There's individual peace. And then we have to continue to wake up to that and hopefully share that with others. And I think that's what we're talking about here is healing ourselves from the idea of otherness and coming to the idea of oneness, and that there is plenty for all. The illusion of power or hoarding is just that. It's an illusion. You die, you ain't taking that with you to heaven, baby. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're going to heaven, wherever you go, I don't know where you go. All right. We have to.
Andrea said, we need to be very alert to how these facts just outlined are changing for the worse rapidly during the COVID situation. Blacks are hardest hit, lower income families also, children's education, Black children much affected by the switch to online learning, et cetera, et cetera. The way I look at it, those who are already on the borderline of poverty are going right over the cliff during COVID, but we are locked into distancing and mostly unaware of what's happening to others, especially in other places.
Well, look, I was in the Philippines last year, and you get into some of the poorer communities and the people are all over each other. There is no social distancing. I mean, multiple families are there. I mean, a lot of us have the benefit of space. We don't have and then you get to the poorer communities, they don't have the benefit of space.
Right.
The more wealth you have, I think you have the benefit of space as well. So that's where it's hitting folks as well in the poorer communities. People live on top of each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, the disease spreads quicker.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to touch upon these 3 slides fairly quickly, and then
Cool.
I have a few takeaways as well.
Let's do it.
So this is kind of to a point there. Inequities wrought by racism and capitalism are not restricted to the United States. On the bottom of page 158, there's a few paragraphs that kind of go into detail as to what Rev Charles and I just discussed. Anti-racist policies cannot eliminate class racism without anti-capitalist policies. Anti-capitalism cannot eliminate class racism without anti-racism. And if you read that and you're saying, well, so you're saying we have to be anti-capitalism? The answer is no. It's simply embracing a further clarification as to what capitalism has meant throughout history. And perhaps we are called to expand our consciousness in such a way that we invite in a new way of operating that can pull the best from this system that we are in. That is a possibility. Yes. And Karl Marx, this is a quote that was in the book. That
hey, Jeffon, real quick, can you make your screen, can you go back to the slideshow? Can you make those slides bigger?
Yeah, am I not in the slideshow right now?
I think it was showing all the slides. You're in? There you go. Yep. Perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
So you
Sorry, brother.
Can see this. No, you're okay.
Yeah.
So this is something that I thought was interesting, because this is at least opening the door to looking at the history. So the discovery of gold and silver in America, the enslavement and in some of these words of minds of the Aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, and turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins, signalized the Rosy Dawn era the era of capitalist production. And so this is kind of what we're revealing. Well, I believe the author is revealing, and he goes into a lot more detail on pages 160 to 162 that I would encourage anybody to kind of sit and park with and look into it and ask, how does it feel? And in what ways can you perhaps expand it in your own understanding? Not saying you have to be a full believer of Karl Marx either. We can take ideas from many people, and it can help piece this idea of history. We just hopefully will not be ignoring something because it doesn't align with us, but maybe look into the reason why it brings that type of feeling. So what capitalism introduces to this mix was a global theft, racially uneven playing fields, unidirectional wealth that rushes upward in unprecedented amounts. I think Andrea was saying that. There are a few questions on page 162 that I would encourage all of us to reflect on. Questions such as, when were the markets ever level playing fields? When could working people compete equally with capitalists? When could Black people compete equally with white people? When could African nations compete equally with European nations? When did the rules not generally benefit the wealthy and white nations? These are some questions that we could literally just sit and park with and recognize that the top 1% of this world, this globe that we are on, owns 50% of the world's wealth. The bottom 3.5 billion, or the poorest 3.5 billion adults, which comprise 70% of the world's working age population, owns 2.7% of the world's wealth. I mean, just that is a staggering data point. 1%, 50% of the world's wealth. I mean, that when I read that, that was absolutely baffling. And COVID, as Andrea said, has disproportionately hurt poor communities. And we see, I think Jeff Bezos' wealth increased, I want to say 49 billion or so through COVID. The billionaires have, this is just kind of bringing it off the top of the head, I think brought in over $450 billion added to their bottom line, their net worth. So we see the disparities continuing to play and being exacerbated at a rapid rate. So let's see. Anything you want to add there?
Just to poke the hornet's nest, I guess, a little bit. How does I'm asking this, how does Bezos having a good idea called Amazon, where you can order anything from your home, from your phone, I'm not trying to downplay anybody but what about him having a good idea that you don't need, while everybody's quarantined in, rabbit hole. It is a rabbit hole, and we don't have time for it, but that's a question. Andrea's active today. Andrea, I love it. So anyway, maybe we explore that rabbit hole at some point.
Yeah.
He started in his garage too,
Yeah.
So.
I mean, so if we go down that rabbit hole, I'm going to read these things and then I'll kind of poke my head out of the rabbit hole and come up. So Adair said, all economic systems and political systems are created and applied by human beings. All are rife with exploitation. I am thinking the problem is not capitalism, but how it is exploited for the special interests of those who gain control. This is true of any system. And then Andrea said, COVID has caused staggering transfer of wealth to the richest, like Amazon. And so the rabbit hole is something that I think we all should venture into every once in a while. Maybe not the YouTube rabbit hole. You don't know when you'll come back up. But imagine if there was a working and living wage for the people who worked at Amazon. And I'm not saying that that's not true. I know some of my friends who work at the corporate office for Amazon, and they're doing exceptionally well. But I also have cousins who are the delivery drivers or warehouse workers at Amazon, and it's $14.63
an hour or whatever it is. Yeah.
So, I mean, just imagine if we were and I don't know, like, money is something that we have been conditioned to believe that is extremely essential. I mean, I pay for my house with it and whatnot, but just a living workable wage, or healthcare, health benefits, um, maternity leave, um, providing ample resources to help people expand their education. Um, Anyways, I don't know. I'm not going to go too much further into that rabbit hole.
You mean a spreading of wealth within a company like Amazon?
They have the resources to do that.
Yeah, understood.
As do, I mean, my wife is a doctor, even in hospitals. You think of some of the techs and the way in which they're working extreme hours for very small pay. And at times they don't even have medical benefits. And then there are huge amounts of resources being flowed, particularly towards orthopedics or cardiologists, which rightfully so. I mean, doing a heart transplant is something a little bit more than maybe changing the sheets at the hospital, but those are both essential positions. My mom works at a hospital where she does a lot of the cleaning, and the way in which she gets paid and treated, it gets to me. But yeah, it's just it's interesting.
I hear that. And there's a distinction there too between Jeff Bezos and Amazon, the community.
Yeah.
So, and as the leader, he could institute some policies. There's no doubt about it.
So in conclusion here, I would like to share a few things, and I'll touch upon, there's one more comment from Andrea. So I would encourage all of us to explore the ideas that challenge you in this chapter and in general. They often will lead to our greatest opportunity for expansion. Continue to revisit this idea of how does a consciousness of oneness play into this conversation of race, capitalism, inequity, inequality. As Rev Charles said, how can you begin to make a difference today? What can you do to share your light in a way that helps other people recognize theirs? Being aware of the observer within you, the part of you that is deeper than the observer. So you can look at the thoughts you think, and then you can observe the part of you that is looking at the thoughts that you think, recognizing the true essence of who you are, and through these processes, continue to recognize the power which you are.
Rock and roll. Great takeaways. Good homework for everybody. Good discussion. That's once again, that felt like 10 minutes. I love that.
Time moves. Time moves.
So
Andrea, one final thing from Andrea. Amazon Smile gives a tiny percentage of my purchase to CSL. That is a program that exists if you sign up for it. What if Amazon gave a tiny portion to the homeless in a similar way?
Let's call it a portion. How about we call it a portion?
Portion.
Let's call it a portion.
Yes.
Because they don't have to do that, but they do. And we're grateful that they give it to us. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, please, everybody, go sign up for Amazon Smile. Let's support our community in all the ways that we can. And we continue to appreciate your financial resources in support of our community as we continue to bring you programming like this, stirring up the hornet's nest, getting in there with Jeffon, going down the rabbit hole. I've actually stirred a hornet's nest once in my life and got attacked by a swarm of bees. It was just silly when I was a kid. I took a bunch of us were playing out in the woods behind our house. I took a stick and jabbed it in there, and that was dumb. Anyway, thank you, Jeffon, for another awesome week of discussion.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, I appreciate you, my brother, very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
As I you.
And thanks for the slides and how you come prepared. Let's see, tomorrow, the Sensational Six at 10 o'clock. We love their brand of ministry. They're a wonderful mix of ministry. Thursday, I'm with Marsha Merkins, continuing our theme this week of entertainment celebrities. We're going to have a great conversation with her and some great stories, I'm sure, as there were yesterday with Don Savage. Let's see. And then Friday, back to Life on Love with me. We'll see what we've got in store this week. Last week was a lot of fun. We'll see what we can put together for this week as well. Saturday, meditation. Sunday, our service. I already gave you a little teaser about that. And of course, everything happens at 10 o'clock. To to contribute to the center, there's a link here. Lori, is there a link? Reverend Lori, is there a link that's obvious for everybody? Will you come out, come from behind the curtain real quick there?
I am not sure. I do not
Oh,
see
okay.
it.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if the participants see it or not, but they can go to our website.
Yes, they can. Or call the center, or mail, all that kind of good stuff. So we appreciate you and all the ways that you support our community. And everybody have an extraordinary Tuesday. Jeffon, any last words?
Just as always, thank you everybody who was willing to chime in and participate. And next week it will be chapter 13. And as always, I just am grateful that Center for Spiritual Living Palm Desert is willing to engage in this conversation. And the George Floyd thing happened all the way back in May, and we're continuing this conversation. And there's been many individuals or many people who have just simply stopped. And your willingness to continue forward is something that I truly appreciate. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of it.
Yeah, you're the man. And I appreciate the walk with you. And I know when Joe gets back in a couple of weeks, he's going to take over with you. I'll miss you, brother.
No.
Anyway, I'll be coming off the bench from time to time, I hope. So it's all good. All right, everybody, have an extraordinary Tuesday. Make it best day ever. Peace and love.